This is the difference in reading instruction presentation done by Brady Malby. So first, talking about reading in a third grade regular education classroom, students were reading independently and they could do so without causing distraction to other students in the class. There obviously were occasional distractions that were in the classroom, and this was third grade done by Mrs. Ranella at Greenville Elementary School, which I actually got to do last semester. We got to do a bunch of reading lessons with them, and I also worked with special ed kids, so was able to do this assignment. As far as reading went in the third through fifth grade special ed classroom, students were able to read their book from a teacher aide or the teacher. Students were usually distracting to other students. That was a big problem in her classroom. So she would do things such as barriers or try turning them around. Students just really struggled to sit still. Students refused to read often and needed prompted. We used the token system in special ed last year for life skills elementary. And so things that we would usually do is like if a student would not want to do their work, they would lose a token, and basically if they had all their tokens by Friday, they were able to get extra free time or extra recess, stuff like that. So that's what they used to get them to do their work. As far as like what students did post reading and regular education, students would take an AR test based on their book. Students would write down like 1 to 3 things that they learned from the book that day. Not all students were able to take an AR test because they weren't done, but they were able to write some things down that they learned that day. Students who weren't done with their book, they would usually keep reading, but they would also write down 1 to 3 things that they learned from their book that day, and they did that in a journal. So what students did post reading in special education was students would take an AR test. They would take the AR test, but they were read out to them, and they were allowed to look back in the book for answers at the questions that they were being asked. Students were able to ask questions to teachers or aides, so such as like if a student didn't know how to answer a question, couldn't find it in the book, we would usually help them. This was something that we definitely dealt with a lot in the classroom, especially with a couple of our students that were lower reading levels. I mean, we have third grade kids there, they're kindergarten reading levels or maybe even below, like we're still teaching them how to read. So it makes sense whenever they're not able to find these answers. So we would have to go back, teach them, and help them find it and hope that this progresses. But we would have to definitely help them while they take them. But we're trying to increase the AR level every single week. As far as the comprehension level in the regular education classroom, students were able to understand the book they were reading and answer questions about that book independently. Students were able to talk about the book or what they read that day with a teacher or a peer in the class, and students could take AR tests on their own and they knew how to put it away afterwards. This was not something that we were able to do in the special education life skills classroom. As far as comprehension in the special education classroom, students could not look at the question and answer it without looking at the book. Students would struggle to stay on task and would lash out when they didn't know how to answer, and students would often say, I can't, or this is too hard. Although we had Mrs. Cap in the life skills class, and she would try to get students not to do this and to break this habit. But it was a tough thing to do because they had been doing it all the way up through school. And she's a first year teacher, but she was doing a great job. But they were getting better, but still really tough for comprehension in the special ed class. As far as what the regular education teacher was doing during lesson is that she was pretty hands off. She was walking around but not interfering with work. She would occasionally answer student questions, but never would give them the answer, would just kind of point them in the right direction. But students were pretty independent during this. As far as what the student was doing in the special ed classroom is that she was reading the test out loud to students. She was helping look back in books to find answers with the students, and she was de-escalating behavior that was going on. Some of the final thoughts I had was reading looks very different. I'm curious to see how special education teachers are able to teach lessons based on things like digraphs and ending sounds, especially in the special ed classroom. That was still something that they were learning for third through fifth grade. Clear differences in curriculum and wording used by the teachers. It just really seemed like a different world. Even though they are older in the life skills classroom, they were lower than in the third grade classroom taught by Mrs. Ranella at Greenville Elementary. So that was just something that you had to think about, and each kid is at a different level. So teaching the same lesson to three different kids, but she did have some really good aids in there, and it was pretty helpful to see that.